Alright, let's talk about something big, really big. I'm talking about giants. For as long as we've told stories around a campfire, we've told stories about them. These aren't just characters in fairy tales. They are woven into the very fabric of our oldest cultures. Think about it. The Greeks had their titans, colossal beings who battled the gods for control of the cosmos. The Norse sagas gave us the frost giants of Jotunheim, powerful and ancient foes of Thor and Odin. Even the Bible speaks of the Nephilim, a mysterious race of giants who walked the earth in ancient times. These stories come from every corner of the globe, filled with epic battles and beings of incredible size and strength. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where did these universal myths come from? This fascination is more than just a good story. It seems to be a fundamental part of the human experience. We look up at towering mountains and vast oceans, and we imagine beings just as grand. These legends served a purpose. They helped our ancestors explain the unexplainable. A massive, oddly shaped rock formation that must have been thrown by a giant in a rage. The rumbling of an earthquake. The snoring of a sleeping titan buried deep beneath the ground. These tales gave a face and a story to the powerful and often terrifying forces of nature. They were a way to make sense of a world that was much larger and more mysterious than their everyday lives. What I find truly fascinating is how these myths connect us to our deep past. They are like a faint echo from a time before recorded history. The idea of a lost race of giants suggests a world that was different from our own, a forgotten age of wonders. It taps into our deep-seated curiosity about our own origins. Were there others who came before us? Were they like us? Or were they something more? These questions are at the heart of exploration. They are the reason I pack my bags and head out into the unknown. We're all searching for answers, looking for a connection to the incredible stories that have been passed down for generations. So, as we get ready to dig into this mystery, keep that in mind. The search for giants isn't just about finding oversized bones. It's about chasing the ghosts of our own imagination. It's about understanding why we, as a species, are so captivated by the idea of something larger than life. From ancient texts to modern-day internet forums, the story of giants persists. It's a legend that refuses to die. And like any good legend, there might just be a kernel of truth buried somewhere inside. Our expedition is to find out just how deep that rabbit hole, or perhaps that giant's footprint, really goes. Let's get started. Now imagine you're an ancient Greek farmer. You're out plowing your field, and your plow hits something hard. You dig around it and unearth a massive bone. It's bigger than any cow bone you've ever seen. It's thicker than your leg. What's your first thought? You don't know about mammoths or mastodons? Paleontology isn't exactly a thing yet, so you turn to the stories you know. This must be the femur of a titan, a hero from the Trojan War, or maybe even one of the sons of the gods. Suddenly, your farmland has become a place of myth and legend. This is how many of our giant stories likely got their start. This wasn't a one-time thing. It happened all over the ancient world. In China, huge fossilized bones were discovered and immediately labeled as the remains of dragons. These dragon bones were highly valued in traditional medicine for centuries. They weren't seen as evidence of prehistoric animals, but as proof of the mythical creatures from their folklore. In Europe, the discovery of massive skulls with a large central hole in the front weren't identified as extinct dwarf elephants. Instead, they were seen as the skulls of the Cyclops, the one-eyed giants from Homer's Odyssey. It's a perfect example of seeing what you believe. This process of misinterpretation is completely understandable. Without a scientific framework, our ancestors did what we all do. They used the knowledge they had to explain the world around them. Fossils of Ice Age megafauna, like woolly rhinos, cave bears, and giant deer, were scattered across Europe and Asia. Each discovery of an unusually large tusk, tooth, or vertebra would have fueled the belief in a bygone era of giants. These bones became sacred relics. They were sometimes put on display in temples as proof of the power of the gods or the reality of the heroic age. They weren't just bones, they were physical links to a mythical past. It's a powerful reminder that context is everything. Today we can walk into a museum and see a fully assembled mastodon skeleton and understand what it is. But thousands of years ago, finding just one of those bones would have been a world-changing event. It would have validated the scariest and most epic stories told by the village elders. The stories weren't just stories anymore. Here was the proof, right in their hands. The line between myth and reality became blurred. And that blurry line is exactly the kind of territory that makes for a great expedition. It's where the best mysteries are found. Let's fast forward a few hundred years. The world is getting bigger. Explorers like Magellan and Columbus are sailing across vast, unknown oceans. This is the age of discovery, and with the discovery of new lands comes the discovery of new peoples and new stories. When European explorers reached the Americas, they encountered tales from indigenous cultures that sounded strangely familiar. Many Native American tribes had their own legends of giants. These weren't just stories of oversized people. They were often tales of powerful, sometimes dangerous beings who had shaped the land and warred with their ancestors. This was like throwing gasoline on an already burning fire of European giant folklore. One of the most famous accounts comes from Ferdinand Magellan's voyage. His chronicler, Antonio Pigafetta, wrote about their encounter with the Patagonian giants in South America. He described them as being so tall that the average European man only reached their waist. He even claimed they captured 2 of them, though they conveniently died on the voyage back to Spain. Was this true, or was it an exaggeration, a tall tale to make their incredible journey sound even more epic? The name Patagonia itself is thought by some to mean land of the big feet, inspired by these supposed giants. The story spread like wildfire across Europe. These accounts had a massive impact. They seemed to offer proof that giants weren't just a thing of the mythical past. They were real, and they were out there, living in the unexplored corners of the world. Every new expedition brought back more stories. In North America, explorers heard tales of the Allegheny, a race of giants who were said to have been defeated and driven from the Ohio Valley by the ancestors of the Iroquois. These stories resonated with the colonists. They were venturing into a new, wild continent, and the idea that it was once home to giants added to its mystique and danger. This period was a perfect storm for giant fever. You had the ancient myths from Europe. You had the discovery of huge fossils, which were still not fully understood. And now, you had first-hand accounts, however embellished, from explorers in the New World. It all blended together into a powerful narrative. The Earth was once ruled by giants, and maybe, just maybe, some of them were still out there. It's a compelling idea, the kind of idea that can shape how people see a new continent. And as we'll see, it set the stage for an explosion of giant claims right here in America. The 19th century in America was a wild time. The nation was expanding westward, full of a sense of destiny and discovery. And right alongside that pioneering spirit was a full-blown obsession with giants. This wasn't just folklore anymore. It was front-page news. All across the country, local newspapers started reporting on the discovery of enormous skeletons. These weren't just slightly large individuals. We're talking about remains of people reportedly 7, 8, even 9 feet tall or more. They were often found buried in ancient mounds, leading to wild speculation about who these people were. These newspaper articles are fascinating to read today. They are filled with vivid details. A farmer in Ohio finds a skeleton with a massive jaw that can fit over his own. A group of workers in Wisconsin unearths a whole graveyard of giants with elongated skulls. The reports were specific, often naming the people who made the discovery and the exact location. This lent them an air of credibility. In an era before the internet and 24-hour news cycles, the local paper was the trusted source of information. If the paper said a giant was found, people were inclined to believe it. This created a nationwide buzz. What was driving this? Part of it was simple curiosity and a hunger for a good story. But there was something deeper going on too. The country was grappling with its own identity. And there was a controversial theory floating around called the mound builder myth. This theory suggested that the thousands of impressive earthen mounds found throughout the Midwest and South weren't built by the ancestors of Native Americans. Instead, they were supposedly built by a lost, superior race of people. Perhaps Vikings, or the lost tribes of Israel. Or, you guessed it, giants. This was a convenient and deeply racist myth that helped justify the displacement of indigenous peoples. The giant skeletons became the supposed proof for this theory. Every time a large skeleton was reported in a mound, it was seen as evidence of this lost race of giant mound builders. It fed into a narrative that disconnected Native Americans from their own heritage and the impressive achievements of their ancestors. So these giant stories weren't just innocent fun. They were tangled up in the politics and prejudices of the time. They were used to create a new mythical history for the continent, one that fit the expansionist agenda of the era. It's a dark side to the giant legend, and one we can't ignore. So, with all these newspaper reports of giant skeletons being dug up, you have to ask, where did all the bones go? This is where the story takes a turn toward conspiracy, and it centers on one of America's most respected institutions, the Smithsonian. According to a popular and persistent theory, the Smithsonian Institution was at the center of a massive cover-up. The story goes that as these giant skeletons were discovered, the Smithsonian would send its agents to collect them. But instead of putting them on display, the institution systematically destroyed the bones to hide the truth about America's past. Why would they do this? The conspiracy theory claims it was to protect the dominant scientific narrative of the time, particularly Darwin's theory of evolution and the accepted timeline of human settlement in the Americas. The existence of a race of 9-foot-tall giants didn't fit neatly into the established models. So, according to the theory, the evidence had to disappear. Proponents of this idea will point to the very newspaper articles we've talked about as proof. They argue that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of discoveries reported. So, if the stories were true, the bones must have gone somewhere. The Smithsonian, they say, is the culprit. Now let's look at the Smithsonian side of the story. From their perspective, there was no cover-up. In fact, they were actively investigating the mound builder claims. Their top archaeologists, like John Wesley Powell and Cyrus Thomas, conducted extensive surveys of the mounds in the late 19th century. Their conclusion, published in a massive report in 1894, was definitive. The mounds were built by the ancestors of modern Native Americans. There was no lost race of giants. They argued that the newspaper reports were either wild exaggerations, misinterpretations of animal bones, or outright hoaxes. They saw their work as debunking a harmful myth, not covering up a truth. So, who do you believe? It's a classic case of a compelling conspiracy versus a more mundane scientific explanation. The idea of a grand cover-up is exciting. It makes you feel like you're in on a secret. The reality is often less dramatic. Many of the giant skeletons were likely just tall individuals whose height was exaggerated with each telling of the story. Others were likely misidentified animal fossils or simply fabricated tales to sell newspapers. The Smithsonian argues that they have no giant skeletons because none were ever sent to them, because they never existed in the first place. But for many, that answer just isn't satisfying enough. We can't talk about giant skeletons without talking about hoaxes, because let's be honest, people love to pull a fast one. And in the 19th century, faking a giant was practically a cottage industry. The most famous example of all is the Cardiff giant. This wasn't a skeleton. It was a 10-foot-tall petrified man that was discovered in 1869 by workers digging a well in Cardiff, New York. It became an instant sensation. People flocked from all over to see this incredible biblical giant, paying 50 cents a pop for a peek. It was the blockbuster attraction of its day. The truth, of course, was much different. The Cardiff giant was the brainchild of a man named George Hull, an atheist who got into an argument with a preacher about the existence of giants in the Bible. To prove how gullible people were, he decided to make his own. He bought a huge block of gypsum, hired sculptors to carve it into the shape of a man, and then aged it with stains and acid. He secretly transported it to his cousin's farm and buried it. A year later, he arranged for it to be discovered. His plan worked better than he could have ever imagined. He made a fortune off his creation. Even after scientists and scholars, like those from Yale University, quickly declared it a fake, a humbug of the first water, people still lined up to see it. The famous showman P.T. Barnum even got in on the action. When he couldn't buy the original, he simply made his own copy and claimed his was the real one, and the Cardiff giant was the fake. This tells you a lot about the mindset of the time. People wanted to believe. The story was more important than the reality. The Cardiff giant wasn't the only one either. It inspired a wave of copycat hoaxes, all trying to cash in on the public's fascination with giants. These hoaxes had a lasting effect. On one hand, they made people more skeptical, but on the other hand, they muddied the waters for any legitimate discoveries. Every time a genuinely large skeleton was found, it was now easier to dismiss it as just another fake. The hoaxes also became part of the conspiracy narrative. Believers in the Smithsonian cover-up claim that the institution deliberately promoted stories about hoaxes like the Cardiff giant to discredit all giant discoveries. It's a tangled web where fact, fiction, and outright fraud are almost impossible to separate. And for an explorer, that's exactly the kind of challenge that gets the blood pumping. Well, The mystery of giant skeletons didn't stay buried in old newspapers and scientific journals. It exploded into our popular culture, and it's been there ever since. In the early 2000s, something incredible happened. Images started circulating online showing archaeological digs with massive human-like skeletons. One famous photo showed a team of archaeologists in a desert landscape, carefully brushing away sand from a skull that was bigger than a person. Headlines declared that National Geographic had uncovered proof of ancient giants in India or Saudi Arabia. The photos went viral, shared millions of times on email and early social media. There was just one problem: they were completely fake. The most famous images were actually entries in a Photoshop contest run by a website called Worth 1000. The goal of the contest was to create a fake archaeological discovery. One artist, who went by the name Iron Kite, was particularly good at it. His images were so realistic and compelling that they were stripped of their context and presented as real news. Despite repeated debunking by National Geographic, Snopes, and other fact-checkers, the images continue to circulate to this day. They are the modern-day equivalent of the 19th century newspaper articles, spreading the myth to a whole new generation. This phenomenon shows the power of a visual. It's one thing to read a story about a 9-foot skeleton. It's another thing entirely to see a photograph of it. Our brains are wired to believe what we see with our own eyes. These faked images tap directly into that part of us. They provide the evidence that so many people are looking for. They have become so ingrained in the online mythology of giants that they are now inseparable from the conspiracy theories. For many, these photos are the smoking gun that proves the Smithsonian cover-up is real. They see them as the evidence that the mainstream media and scientific community are trying to hide. This digital folklore is fascinating. It's the same story, the same human desire for a world of wonders, just repackaged for the internet age. Instead of relying on a local newspaper, the myths are now spread by blogs, YouTube videos, and social media memes. The theories get more elaborate, connecting the giants not just to the mound builders but to aliens, Atlantis, and all sorts of other grand conspiracies. It's a testament to the enduring power of the giant myth. No matter how much science and evidence is presented to the contrary, the story is just too good to let go, and the search for that lost world of giants continues, one click and one share at a time. So, if there wasn't a secret race of giants, what's the scientific explanation for all of this? Let's break it down, because the truth is often just as interesting as the myth. First, as we've touched on, is the misidentification of animal bones. The ancient world was full of megafauna. The bones of a mammoth, a mastodon, or even a large extinct bear could easily be mistaken for a giant humans by someone without anatomical training. A mammoth's pelvis, for example, looks surprisingly like a giant human skull to an untrained eye. A single large femur could spark a legend that lasts for centuries. This is likely the origin of many of the oldest giant myths around the world. Then there's the issue of human height. Yes, some of the skeletons found in the 19th century were probably genuinely tall individuals. Human height varies, and conditions like pituitary gigantism can cause people to grow to exceptional sizes, sometimes over 8 feet tall. Finding a 7-foot skeleton from an ancient burial mound would have been an astonishing discovery. But in the retelling, 7 feet could easily become 8, and 8 could become 9. It's like a game of telephone over generations. A simple exaggeration meant to make a good story even better can eventually morph into a full-blown myth about a race of giants. Another factor is how bones can be disturbed after burial. Sometimes bones from different individuals, or even a mix of human and animal bones, can get jumbled together in one grave. An archaeologist might find a normal-sized human skull next to an unusually large femur from another person, or even a bear, and mistakenly conclude they belong to the same giant individual. This is especially true for amateur diggers in the 19th century, who might not have had the careful excavation techniques we use today. They were digging for relics and stories, not necessarily for scientific accuracy. It's easy to see how mistakes could be made. Finally, we have to consider the simple power of belief. The mound builder myth created a powerful expectation. People expected to find giants, so they did. It's a classic case of confirmation bias. Every ambiguous piece of evidence was interpreted as proof of the theory they already believed in. They weren't necessarily lying, they were seeing the world through the lens of a compelling story. Science, on the other hand, requires us to challenge our own beliefs and look for the simplest explanation that fits all the evidence. In this case, the evidence points not to a lost race of giants, but to a combination of megafauna fossils, tall individuals, excavation errors, and a whole lot of hoaxes and wishful thinking. So, where does that leave us? We've journeyed from the myths of the ancient Greeks to the viral hoaxes of the digital age. We've seen how the discovery of mammoth bones, the tall tales of explorers, and a wave of 19th century newspaper hype all came together to create one of the most persistent legends in American history. We've looked at the science, the hoaxes, and the conspiracies. And after all that, the question remains, why do we keep searching for giants? Why does this story refuse to fade away, even in the face of so much evidence to the contrary? I think it's because the legend of the giants isn't really about the bones. It's about us. It reflects a deep and universal human longing for a world that is more magical, more mysterious, and more epic than our own. We look at the modern world, which can sometimes feel small and fully explained, and we crave the idea of a lost age of wonders. The giants represent a past that was grander, a time when the world was young and inhabited by beings of incredible power. It's a story that makes our own history feel more exciting and significant. It connects us to something larger than ourselves. This legend also speaks to our rebellious spirit, our suspicion of authority. The Smithsonian cover-up theory is so popular because it taps into a modern distrust of institutions. It frames the search for giants as a battle between brave, independent researchers and a stuffy, dogmatic establishment that wants to hide the truth. It's a narrative of the underdog, and we all love a good underdog story. It makes us feel like we are the true explorers, uncovering secrets that they don't want us to know. It's a powerful and compelling way to see the world, even if it's not supported by the facts. In the end, whether you believe in a literal race of 9-foot giants or not, the legend itself is a treasure. It's a piece of our collective folklore, a story we've been telling ourselves for thousands of years in one form or another. It's a map of our own imagination, a testament to our endless curiosity about the past and our place in the universe. As an explorer, I can tell you that the search is often just as important as the discovery. And the search for giants, this enduring quest for the extraordinary, tells us more about the human spirit than any skeleton ever could. The mystery is the destination,